So thank you to the organizers for including our paper in the program. Today, I'll try to convince you that FinTech can be used to correct present bias in saving decisions. This is joint work with Alberto Rossi at Georgetown University. So let me start with motivation. So there is extensive evidence in the academic literature that individual investors make all sorts of mistakes and have all sorts of biases, right? So for example, from Marbury and Odin, we know that they have this position effect, they are overconfident, and when they allocate their wealth in a 401k account, usually they perform naive diversification. So unfortunately, much less is known on how to correct those biases, especially on a large scale. Now, in terms of the solution proposed, the solutions go from nudges to more recently robo-advising. Now, what do we do in this paper? In this paper, we show that FinTech can reduce present bias in savings. So FinTech, it is a tool to correct biases. And in particular, we are talking about the present bias. So the present bias is the natural tendency to procrastinate, right, those activities that entail immediate cost in order to pursue the ones that instead entail immediate reward, right? So if you think about the decision between saving and consuming, right, because obviously consumption entails an immediate reward, individuals tend to prefer consuming rather than saving. Now, in theory, so there are many models that predict that agents who are sophisticated enough, that are aware of their present bias, so their tendency to procrastinate, they would demand what they are called commitment devices. So what are these? Those are sort of arrangements to facilitate, right, the achievement of the desired action. So for example, if the aim is to save more, a commitment device could be to start a saving account where the interest, right, is lost if in those months where a deposit is not made. Now, so this will be what we call a hard commitment device, right? So a commitment device that entails a monetary penalty. So there is a cost, right, for deviating from the planned action. But there are also soft commitment devices. So those devices that instead entail no penalty. Now, obviously, there is a trade-off between the two, right? Because hard commitment devices are less scalable because obviously individuals are less willing, right, to enter in those devices, but conditionally on them entering into those devices, they are more effective than soft devices. So the trade-off here is that hard commitment are less scalable, but more effective than soft commitment. Now, another difference is between self versus pre-designed devices, because most of the studies, the academic studies, focus on pre-designed commitment devices, right? Because usually there is a kind of experimental setting where the researchers create those devices that are pre-designed and usually are well designed, right? And are then distributed to a random sample of the population. Now, obviously, in the real world, where individuals have to design their goals, it's much less clear, rather, whether they are able to do so and whether they are able to create well-designed goals. So another trade-off is between pre-designed goals and self-designed goals. And why this is important? This is important because nowadays, all over the world, banks offer those goal-setting tools to increase savings to their customers. So if you are in the US and you have a Chase Bank or Wells Fargo or Bank of America account, you will find this goal-setting tool. So we are talking here about millions of individuals worldwide. Now, so what do we do in this paper? In this paper, we try to assess the efficacy of soft and self-designed commitment devices in saving decisions. Okay, so how do we do so? We do so using data from a FinTech app, and so you use this data to quantify the effect, because the essence of the FinTech app is that it allows users to set those saving goals. So users are responsible for their design of the saving goals. And then we complement this data with a survey that we run on a random sample of users, and we use this survey to uncover the economic channel and to rule out substitution effects. Now, what are our main findings? So first of all, we find that goal setting increases savings. And we find this with parallel regressions that use a rich set of fixed effects, and we use a diff-in-diff strategy to show that the effect is causal. Second, we show that these effects, so this increase in saving, fades away only partially over time. So which means it's not due to a new toy effect. And third, we find that this effect is not due to a substitution effect. So in other words, it's not that users just transfer funds from their bank to the app. And finally, what we find is that our results seem consistent with a monitoring channel, which is in agreement with those models where agents don't have a monetary cost, but they have a psychological cost because they experience disutility from falling short of their target. And we reach this conclusion by looking at the survey we ran. So we asked directly to the users, we look at login activity, and we look at the heterogeneity of some of our results. So let me briefly also explain the setup. So the app we use is called Gimme5, and it's been developed by the asset manager Acomea. So before October 2017, the app worked as essentially a digital piggy bank, which is a saving account where investors can save small amount, as small as €5, but differently from a standard saving account, that money is invested in the mutual funds of the asset manager. Now, in October 2017, the app introduced a goal setting feature, which means that individuals have the ability to create saving goals, which means they have to create what they want to save for, what's the horizon of the goal, how much they want to save, and what is the mutual funds they want their money to be invested in. So to give a sense of the app, let me show you some of the screenshots that guides you through the process of setting the goal. So the first step, obviously this is in Italian, so I will translate in English. So the first step is to choose a name for the goal. So for example, trip to the US. Second, the user has to select the category the goal belongs to. So for example, general saving, vehicles, house, leisure, travels, or other category. And then they have to select the amount they want to save. So for example, it's 3,000 euros for this target, and they have to decide the deadline. In this case, it's the end of August 2019. And the last step of setting the target is to choose the funds they want to invest the money in. So 3 funds are sort of primed. So the Prudente, the Dinamico, and Aggressivo. So they differ in terms of like the risk return trade-off they offer. And by clicking here, then the user can select from the rest of the funds. There are in total 14 funds they can choose from. And this in the center, it's the screenshot that shows like how the users can monitor their progress towards their goal. So this is a pretty standard progress bar where they have like the final amount they want to save, in this case $3,000, and they can see how close they are to the achievement of their target. And finally, to deposit money on the app, all they need to do is to click on this button, and they can deposit as little as €5. Okay, so from this app, we get the four main sort of data sources that we use in the empirical analysis. So first of all, we have information about the users who created an account since 2014. And so for these users, we have the age, the gender, when they created the account, and where they live. Then we have information about the goals. So all the data they input when they created the goal. So which means we have what is the name of the goal, the category of the goal, the horizon, the amount, and where they decide to invest their funds. Then we have the daily frequency, all the deposits and the withdrawals. And finally, we have information on the name and the CUSIP of the mutual fund they choose. Now, we complement this data with a survey. So we ran this survey in March 2021. We sent it by email to a random sample of 5,000 users, and we got a pretty high response rate of 16%. And so why this survey is very important? Because it allows us to observe things that we cannot get from the data. In particular, we can get information of their saving habits outside the app before and after its adoption. We ask questions about the motivation for using goals. So why do they find goals motivating, and what are the factors that influence the achievement or not of the goals? And then characteristics of the users are risk aversion, education, income, and financial literacy. So because we are talking here about pre-designed, so self-designed goal, the first thing we do is to try to understand what are the main characteristics of the goal. This is a sort of a sanity check to see whether these goals are sensible or not. So these are sort of univariate distribution. On this plot here, we have the distribution of the duration of the goals. And as you can see from here, the majority of the goals have a duration of less than 1 year, because this is measured in days. And there is a bunching exactly at the 1 year and at the 2 years. When we look at the amount, what we see, there is still some bunching, right, at the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and 5,000. But also here, what we see is that the majority of the goals are around 1,000 euros or less. When we look at the type of the fund, we find that the most common the investment vehicle that they choose is a balanced fund. So a balanced fund are funds that hold both fixed income and stocks. And when we look at the category, we see that the most common category is the general saving category, which is then followed by the travel. So when we look at the joint characteristic, so here we look at the joint characteristic in terms of the duration, in terms of days on the x-axis, and target amount and risk of the investment vehicle on the left and the right plot. So what we see that there's a positive relation, which seems to make sense, right? Because obviously it takes longer to reach targets that have a higher amount. And also we see that it takes, users tend to invest in riskier vehicles when their targets have a longer duration. So our baseline results, as I was mentioning before, are about the effect of goal setting on saving. So what are the economic priors here? So on the one hand, we can expect a positive effect, but from what we know from the literature in psychology and in econ. Because from the literature in psychology, what we know that goal setting helps individuals because it helps them to focus energy on the goal and allows them to track, right, their performance against the goal. And from the econ literature, there are models where those soft commitment devices offer motivation not because of the monetary cost, but because of a psychological cost of falling behind the goal. On the other hand, we could also expect a negative or no effect if the goal, for example, is not well designed. So if the goal is too ambitious or unrealistic, then obviously it can be discouraging. So what we find in the data. So our baseline regression is a panel regression at the user account level. So on the left-hand side, we have the net monthly net deposit for user I in account J at time T. Then we have user fixed effect, time fixed effect, and then we have a target dummy, which is equal to 1 if individual I has a goal at time T in account J. And here we double cluster at the user and monthly level. So what we are interested in is this beta coefficient, which tells us what is the incremental effect on saving of having a target. So what we find when we look at net deposit, so our first column here, so the constant, which is how users save on average when they don't engage in goal setting, is 27 euros per month. While when they have a target, they save an additional 26 euros per month, which is economically quite sizable because it's about $300 per year. And when we decompose the net deposits in deposits versus versus withdrawals, what we find is that this effect is driven by deposits as opposed, so from an increase in deposit as opposed to a reduction in withdrawals. Now, one possible concern is that this overall effect is just a new toy effect. So it's just concentrating on the very first month. So what do? We decompose the overall effect over the different months before and after setting the goal. And what we find is that while obviously it's higher over the first 6 months, it doesn't fall to 0 thereafter, but it seems to plateau around 15 euros. So it doesn't seem to be a new toy effect going on here. A second concern is that this effect could be simply due to a substitution effect. So what does it mean is that users just transfer funds from their bank to the app. Now, because we don't observe what they do in their bank accounts, then we ask them. So we ask information on how they've changed their saving outside the app before and after using the app. And we do so by asking 2 quantitative questions where we directly ask how much they think they've saved on average, and a more qualitative question where we ask them if they've changed or not their saving. In the interest of time, let me focus on the qualitative question. And what we find is that 51% of users tell us that they have not changed their saving outside the app. And actually, if anything, it seems that they have increased, because 35% they have increased and only 13% have decreased their saving outside the app. So if anything, this seems to be more of a spillover effect rather than a substitution effect. Now, one problem of our specification is that we cannot control for the endogeneity of the decision of setting the goal. And so how do we overcome this problem? By using a beta testing that the app, the developer used before the official release of the new feature. Because what happened is that 50 days before the official release, about 122 individuals, 122 users, which are the beta testers, were given the opportunity to use this new tool. So this allows us to implement a definitive strategy where the beta testers are the treated group. And so this allows us to estimate an intention to treat effect, because obviously they're allowed to use the new feature, but they are not forced to do so. And when we do when you use this setup, we still find a positive effect. So we find that the treated dummy is positive and it's equal to 5 euros. So we still find an incremental effect of the target. Now, in the interest of time, I will skip this part, but because essentially we don't have the details of the randomization algorithm the company used to select the beta tester, we also used a matched sample. So what we do is for each of the beta tester, we create a matched sample and we rerun the main test. Obviously, after the match, the beta testers and the match sample are almost indistinguishable. And so we run the test and we still find a positive effect. Now, let me just spend the last few minutes before I wrap up on the channel. So the last
about 1 or 2 more minutes left.
Just 2 minutes, and then I'll just play the last 2 slides, and then I will be done. So the last part of the paper, we addressed the question, what is the economic channel? So why does goal setting increase saving? Now, both the psychology and the econ literature suggest 2 channels. One is the specificity of the goal, right? Because from the psychology literature, we know that having specific goal is more motivating than having goals that are too vague or too general. The second channel is the monitoring channel, whereby individuals derive utility, right, from comparing outcomes to their goals. So again, this is more of a psychological cost of falling behind their goal. So the main test is we ask them, right? So we ask what is the most motivating aspect of having a saving goal, and what they tell us is that monitoring, it's like 60% of the users tell us that monitoring is the most motivating aspect, followed by the specificity of the goal. We ran other tests using data, but let me jump to the conclusions. So what do we do in this paper? In this paper, we study the effectiveness of soft and self-designed commitment devices in saving decisions. Why do we think they are interesting? They are interesting because it's less obvious that those soft and self-designed goals work, right? Because there is no penalty, and we don't know whether users are able to create well-designed goals. On the other hand, they are interesting also because they are more scalable against with respect to hard goals, hard commitment devices. We do so by using data and a survey. We find that goal setting increases savings. The effects fades away only partially over time. There is no substitution effect whereby individuals just transfer money from their bank account into the app. And also we find that the results seem to be consistent with the monitoring channel, because individuals find the monitoring the most motivating aspect of having a saving goals. Finally, why we believe this is very important, because nowadays millions of customers are offered these tools by the bank. So that's why we believe it's very important to understand how individuals set the saving goals and whether they are helpful or detrimental.
Thank you so much, Antonio. So now we have the discussant, Alessandro Previtero. You have 15 minutes until about 5:38, 39.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for inviting me to discuss this paper. I really like this paper. What the authors do, they look at the effect of these soft self-designed commitment devices. And I think this is important because there is this debate whether FinTech can help or harm individuals. I would say that they have an impressive empirical setting, and they do very careful data analysis. So they start from evidence looking at the same investors, how they behave across different accounts. Then they add evidence from this small natural experiment for this 122 beta tester. And then they're very clever in running a follow-up survey to help both the identification of the effects and the mechanism. Overall, I think, although this seems like a new paper, has already a lot of robustness check and it's well executed. My comments would be about the contribution of the paper, the identification, the economic magnitudes that here relates also to the external validity, and how to interpret the evidence. So the idea that you can use psychology to increase saving, it's a fairly old one in behavioral economics. It starts with default and nudges, the standard Taylor and Benerzi paper. And for those of you who are interested, I should say that there is a flare-up in these nudges literature, whether or not they are effective, who they help. So something that is very lively literature right now. But also there are other mechanisms that you can use from psychology to increase savings. You can offer savings accounts that are related to raffle prizes like lottery type, or also you can offer hard commitment devices, save and increase where you cannot really touch the money. This paper look more at the new way of fostering savings, and it relates to FinTech. And I'm just going to cite 3 papers here in this area. The one that Yaron is going to present show that once you introduce smartphone app, consumer decrease their discretionary spending. Medina and Pagel have a paper where they show that providing weekly or bi-weekly messages increase savings. And also Alberto, Francesco, and Michael have a paper where they show that providing peer information increase affects spending. So the key here is to position this paper in this FinTech literature. I think is stress this soft self-design commitment device, which the others do. But I think it's also very important here to try to emphasize this emotional side of it. And I'm going to come back to this when we talk about the interpretation. For now, let me just point out that all the evidence we have in this 3 paper I cite here, it's about information. And so we want to be careful of writing another paper where the main channel is information, and the monitoring explanation they currently have seems to be very much related to this information channel already documented in the literature, broadly speaking. So identification challenging. I like to think when I look at identification of a paper, what is the ideal empirical setup? The ideal here is randomly assign the ability to set up goals to some people, not to others. Even under this condition, you want to control for substitution effect across different accounts. Now, of course, that's not random assignment in the field is almost impossible. So then we are left with some issue. We have selection at the investor level. People that decided to use the goals are different from non-adopters. But we have a more nuanced but not less important selection at the investor time level. I can start using the goal because I have a need to start saving more. And of course, substitution effects are very much relevant, even without random assignment. So what do the others do? I'm going to show you a couple of tables. This is the table 2 from the paper. What do they do here as a first cut? They look at the investor I time T analysis. And so here what they're doing is they are comparing goal adopters to non-adopters. And again, here there is the selection issue I just pointed out. Goal adopters might be very different from non-adopters. I think a step in the right direction, they have it in the following table, panel B, where they look now at the account level, and they look only at investors that have accounts with goals and without goals. Okay, so they are comparing adopters between accounts with and without goals. But let me point it out that they are not doing this at the same point in time, because the fixed effects are separately at the investor level and the time level. So imagine that, for example, you want to get married and you need to start saving for the wedding. Then you open a goal, wedding, and then you start saving in this account. You can see that here the causality doesn't go from the app to your behavior. You actually go from your pre-existing need to save for your wedding to starting a goal. So how can you start addressing this? I think they can use investor by time fixed effects. This way they will be comparing investors across different accounts, but at the same point in time, before and after. For example, you have decided to get married the same month before, the same month after, and if they don't have enough power, they can look at this at least at the quarterly level. Now, even if we do this, we are left with substitution effect. And so they address substitution effect using these beta testers. And the results that they find is the economic magnitude is smaller, even in the match sample is about 1/3. I think that a more convincing test of substitution effect could be looking at the non-goal accounts before and after the adoption of goals. Because under substitution, those accounts that do not have a goal, if you are substituting, they should go down. Now, you can run these looking at only goal adopters. What you will be doing is comparing early to late goal adopters. Again, the concern here might be that the timing of choosing when to adopt a goal is endogenous. It's not selection at the investor level anymore, because eventually everybody use goals. It's the timing that could still be endogenous. And so if that's a concern, then what you can do is, for the beta tester, you can use the date of the beta app. And for everybody else, you can use the date of the launch of the app. Those are going to be a bit more exogenous dates. So what about substitution outside of the app? So I think the paper, the authors are very clever in running an outside survey, which I think it helps alleviate some of this concern. But let me point it out that there is what I think it could be an issue in terms of measurement errors. So if I ask you, how much did you spend last year? Would any of you be able to provide me a figure that's accurate within the $100 to $200 which is kind of part of the bulk of the effect here? Even if measurement error was not an issue, we have to account for the possibility that investor offset the saving by increasing liabilities. For example, Bashir and al. Show that when you start saving for retirement with automatic enrollment, there might be potentially some offsetting effect in terms of increasing auto loans and mortgages. Medina and Pagel have a paper that actually look at this, and it helps in terms of providing evidence. The others, because they find that you don't have credit card debt increase when you increase savings. My suggestion here is, if you can run a follow-up survey, try to elicit the level of consumption, so to get a more aggregate picture, and trying to back the level of saving from that. And if possible, ask direct questions in terms of liabilities and credit card debt. So let me turn now to the economic magnitude and the external validity. So when you look at this graph, what happens over time, you can see that the first month after you start using gold, your savings are somewhere between 40 and 50 euros. And then they decline, your net deposit, I should say, they decline somewhere below 10 or around 10 after 3 quarters. So you can see that the effect seems to be quickly diminishing. Now, if you look at these, you might wonder whether their estimates are indeed an upper bound, because there is this tendency to drop saving over time. So it seems that there is some initial enthusiasm going on with the saving goal that might dissipate. But also, you might want to think that some of these investors, actually the majority of these investors, 72%, do not reach their goals. So this might imply that future times they might not be as motivated. And so the effect going forward after the first few years could dissipate, could be very small. So again, here the idea would be that your estimates might be an upper bound. But I think there are also very strong reasons why your estimates might be a lower bound. And I can mention two. First of all, there are no automatic savings plan in this app. So once you decided to save $50 for your wedding, those do not take automatically withdrawn from your account month after month. And also the app, to my understanding, don't send you push notification. So you can imagine how those two channels could be very effective on, after you deciding you want to save 50 euros, keeping your level of 50 euros. Now, the caveat here, though, is that those two features seems to be prevalent in all the other apps that are on the market. And so, what you are going to gain in terms of economic magnitude here, you might lose in terms of external validity, because your app is very specific in missing those two features. So let me conclude my points in looking at the interpretation of the evidence. And I think here that's where we want to be a bit more careful. The author motivated their paper looking at present bias preferences. And so if present bias preference were the main channel here, I think you can make some predictions. So the investors that are more present bias should have stronger, we should find stronger effects for more present biased investor, but also we should find stronger results for specific, more tangible goals. And if you think about this literature of present bias preference, the underlying idea is consumption today is very salient. If I have to give up a nice dinner or buying nice clothes right now, consumption in the future is less tangible. If I have to save for things that happen 1 year, 5 years from now, those are less tangible. So comparing now versus later is not an apple-to-apple comparison. What the authors find doesn't seem to support present bias preference directly, because the app is as effective for patient versus non-patient investor, and is less effective for investors that choose specific goal. And so this monitoring channel per se, although it might be consistent with the vulnerability roadmap model, is not a direct proof of correcting present bias preference. Because this disutility from falling short of the goal is also consistent with just reference dependent and loss aversion. And this idea that separate accounts themselves can change behavior is more related to mental account. The key here, if you really want to think in terms of the smoking gun to provide evidence in terms of present bias preference, has to do with this tangibility of future benefits or this emotional side of future benefits. So what are my suggestions here? I think that there are two routes the author can go. They can improve on measure of present bias preferences. If they have the opportunity to go back and survey participants, they can try to measure present bias preferences directly. Now, this is a bit trickier than you might think. So currently, the authors just measure present discount. So, how much are you trading for money today versus money in a week? To estimate present bias preference, and I have a citation here that could be very useful from PNS, Dean and Ortoleva, to measure present bias, you need to have present discount, but also future discount rates. What is your trade-off between money in a week and 2 weeks from today? Now, measuring present bias preferences, eliciting this type of preference, is actually a big deal, and you have to be very careful. There is an AR paper by Andreoni and Sprenger that make the point that if you really want to elicit present bias preference, you need to be incentive compatible, then you need to provide almost like money in hands to participants to elicit the right present bias preferences. So that's why these field measures are worth taking a shot, but they might still be very noisy. But alternative, what they can do is they can randomize, or if they have the chance of running a follow-up experiment, or investigate more with the current data, the emotional attachment to the goal. For example, they can do a breakdown whether or not clients name their own accounts or they use standardized name, whether clients use personalized features, assuming they can. If they're not, that's definitely something to try to do as a field experiment. And also rate how emotionally meaningful are the goals. The buckets they have, they are meaningful, but I can argue that, if you call your goal wedding or rainy fund, there is a different emotional attachment. Ultimately, the idea
Alessandro,
here...
you have 1 or 2 more minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the last 2 slides. So the idea here is going back to what people have done in marketing. This is a study that's 10-year-old. They were trying to get people to save more for retirement using present bias preferences or counteracting present bias preference. What they did is the computer would take you a picture and then they would show you an old version of yourself. And as you increase saving, you will see your future self smiling more. That in itself helped to double saving rates for retirement. But you can see the goal here is to make more tangible the future consequences, more emotionally meaningful, the future account, the future self. Let me conclude. I really enjoy reading the paper. I think the author can strengthen the contribution related also to the old literature on how to counteract biases and increase savings. What I see as like the most novel part of their story is the emotional treatment more than the information story. In terms of identification, they might want to try investor time fixed effect and look at the substitution, looking at the non-goal accounts. They won't comment a bit more extensively in terms of whether it's an upper or lower bound. And also, and last, be very careful in terms of highlighting present bias preference so prominently in the paper, because their evidence doesn't really at least speak exclusively to that. Thanks.
This was a great discussion. Thank you so much, Alessandro. Antonio, would you like to respond to Alessandro's comments and perhaps also answer some questions that came out in the chat?
Yes, so first of all, thank you very much for the great discussion. Yes, adding individual time fixed effect is something we have to do. At the moment, what we do, those user account level regression, we also have a table where we restrict the sample to only the cases where individuals have both targets and not target at the same time. But yes, I mean, we need to add that time by user fixed effect. And it also, yeah, makes sense to look at the substitution effect within the app. With respect to measurement error, I think also one thing we can do is, because we ask how much they saved on average before and after adopting the app, we can try to match that the number they gave us with the actual number we see on the app, right? So because maybe this comparison could alleviate, will tell us how their response is different from what we see in the data. Hopefully, we will see.
Yes, sorry to interject, Antonio. So one thing that we do that I think is kind of very useful in this respect is the fact that we do have report results only for those individuals that say that they do not save outside the app. So that where the app is the only mean through which they save, and they don't have any other saving account. So from that perspective, kind of we rule out this effect kind of mechanically, but of course it's on a subset. But I think I completely agree. So sorry for Antonio for interrupting. Go ahead.
Worries. In terms of yes, credit and liabilities, yeah, we can run another survey. Although I think we are in Italy, and my experience, Italians are very different from Americans in this sense. So they're not so kind of propense to get these loans, or I mean I don't think this will be the case in Italy, but yes, we can check. Yes, measuring present bias, yes, more directly is also a very good suggestion, and yeah, we are aware it's complicated. Yes, we look at that papers. It's just that in the first survey, we wanted to be as comprehensive as possible, and it was our kind of first attempt, but definitely on we can run another survey actually just specific on measuring, because this requires exactly more than one question, right? If I remember correctly, it's a matter of exposing the user to a sequence of choices until essentially you are able to elicit the exact what is the beta delta in the present bias utility. Yeah, so I think this will require individual specific survey.
So, sorry to interject again, but I think one thing that the suggestion about the emotional aspect, I really like it. So we never thought about it at all. And so we kind of were categorizing. So we have the name of the goals that the individual set up, but we basically use we just categorize them, but we never try to kind of categorize the goals in terms of more or less endearing kind of words or terms or like events. And so I think that's something that we can definitely do, and that could give us a lot of traction, in particular if we kind of move towards having more of interpretation in terms of trying to push the effectiveness of goal setting in terms of kind of the emotional importance of the goal.
Especially want to distinguish the emotional from the pure information. And with respect to external validity, yes, reminders, automatic plans. Yes, we are working with the company a little bit on this, but I think this would be, a completely different paper. I don't think we can fit too much from this. So I think we will focus on, yes, especially on the emotional side, on the measurement error, and on the substitution effect within the app and with the individual time fixed effect. But yeah, thanks again for the comments, and thanks again also for the suggestions. So it would be so constructive. Yeah, thank you very much.